welcome to our lockdown live on online misinformation and disinformation. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Professor Sherri Hope Culver as our expert. Sherri Hope Culver serves as Director of the Centre for Media and Information Literacy, CMIL, at Temple University, USA, where she is an Associate Professor in the Department of Media Studies and Production. The CMIL is recognised as a Global Chair of Media and Information Literacy by UNESCO and is a member of the Global Alliance for Partnerships on Media and Information Literacy, aka GAPMIL. Sherri serves as Vice Chair of the International Steering Committee for GAPMIL, and Sherri's teaching and consulting centres on the business of media with a focus on children's media. So as a consultant, Sherri advises children's media companies such as YouTube Kids and Nickelodeon on educational issues and media literacy inclusion. Sherri regularly presents internationally on media literacy and children's media topics. Sherri has authored and co-edited several books, including serving as co-editor of the Yearbook on Media and Information Literacy and Intercultural Dialogue for several years. Most recently, Sherri authored a chapter in the latest edition of 20 Questions about youth and the media entitled "How are the needs of children considered in children's media?" She has been interviewed by major news outlets, including The Variety, National Public Radio, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and the LA Times. Professor Sherri Hope Culver is thus ideally placed to be our expert witness on the question of misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, and we'll get into that because we had a lot of confusion about what they all meant, so you're the perfect person to tell us. So thank you so much for joining us. I will start by asking you the first question. So please may you begin by just telling us what your role is as Director of the Centre for Media Information and Literacy and what work takes place there.
First, let me say that I'm thrilled to be here and be talking to all of you, and I'm really looking forward to your questions and some dialogue about it. My position at the Center for Media and Information Literacy is in addition to my teaching. So I would consider my primary role, like day in and day out, to be a professor, and I teach courses about the media industry and about media literacy, and those things will probably come up as we talk more. So the center does different kinds of projects. Sometimes we work directly with teachers, sometimes with schools, sometimes with parents. Sometimes they're global projects, and sometimes they're just across the street. And it really depends on folks that are reaching out to me and needs that they have. Sometimes it is a grant-funded project, but often it's really someone who's reaching out because they have a need, sort of what we're doing here. Like they have a need about some information about media literacy, media and information literacy, and they have somehow found me and they want either training. Sometimes I'll do workshops for parents, often do things with parents, help them to navigate the media environment with their children. And sometimes we're doing research projects with students, right? So similar to projects that you probably do where they're either undergraduate or graduate students looking at the way in which media, the way in which media discusses and integrates media literacy into content and really a whole range of topics. So I'm fortunate that it can sort of follow the things, the center really follows the things that I'm most interested in. And global communication around MIL is a very deep interest of mine. So that's where we focus.
That's so interesting. I didn't realize you worked with so many parents. That's such a, obviously specific focus. Thank you for that. I'm going to just hand over to Jennifer for the next question now.
Okay, nice meeting you, Sherri. Just like Kathy pointed out earlier, there's kind of confusion as to the real definition or the differences between misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. They all have information in them, so it's it's easy to be able to confuse their meanings.
Yeah.
So how would you define them, and in what instances would you say we're encountering these different forms of information? So would like to hear from you as someone who is in the field. How will you distinguish between these forms of problematic information?
I mean, I agree with you that these terms can be very confusing, and I'm just thrilled that even in the three that you shared, fake news was not one of them. And that already tells me that you have a deeper understanding of the terminology than maybe other folks that I talk to sometimes. So when I think of media literacy, I think of let's say an umbrella term that covers, and I'll give a definition in a minute, but an umbrella term that covers many different areas. When I think about misinformation or disinformation, I think of that as a subset of media literacy. And I should also mention that I'm saying media literacy and media and information literacy a couple of different ways. Media literacy tends to be the term that is used most often in the United States, within the US. But when you look at the global environment for these topics, MIL, media and information literacy, is the term that's most often used. So the other piece I'll say before I even give a definition is that I don't know how much it matters. It's in the skills that you need, the influence, the way in which it can be manipulative is similar. So frequently people will say that misinformation is incorrect information that people share accidentally, whereas disinformation is information that people share that's wrong but is intentionally shared. And malinformation, and it's funny, malinformation is not a term that I hear very often. You know, malware, we think of malware as being really the sort of evil kind of, you know, viruses that can get into our computers. So malinformation, if I think of these in stages, I think of misinformation, disinformation, malinformation as like progressive ways of looking at the sharing of incorrect information. And that's why I said it almost doesn't matter what the reason is, because whatever your intention was, the way in which I received that information is really what's most important. You may have done it in the nicest frame possible, thought you were spreading information that was true, but if it's not, it still can be equally manipulative to me. So that's the way I would look at it. And I do want to just mention that when I think about the definition of media literacy, right, that to me is the definition that we use most often is the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and then use that to act using all forms of communication. And that's a similar definition for MIL, whether it's media literacy or media and information literacy. So you can see how misinformation and disinformation, understanding that, and what I would put that under is really news literacy, is a part of the bigger whole.
Right. I've always thought that literacy is not just about reading or writing. So hearing this other part of media literacy and how the multiple ways that we can actually teach it to young people, I just find that very, 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 very illuminating. And so I'm just going to say thank you for that.
Jump straight into the third question. From your perspective, what has been the biggest challenge when dealing with misinformation and disinformation, especially on matters COVID-19? And do you have any sense of sources of this misinformation?
I think the biggest problem in our current environment with COVID-19 and the pandemic and misinformation is that in this case, we're talking about issues of life and death, right? I mean, literally life and death. We're not just talking about spreading, you know, rumors about who's dating whom, or what celebrity is doing something and what celebrity isn't, or even something that it might have to do with government action. We're talking about things, misinformation that can really affect the kind of medical attention people get, the kind of medical attention they feel they should get, the way they should be acting. I mean, that's a serious issue. And in my country, we are living that right now, right? Where we have information, incorrect information that's being spread, and we're watching issues, and we're watching the number of cases of COVID going up instead of going down. So that to me is the biggest difference here. Now, the reality is that you can't just flip a switch and make people understand how to make their way through misinformation, disinformation overnight. That's not going to happen that way. So what this really points up in this moment in time is the critical position we are in to make sure that we do not find ourselves in a situation where people are faced with life and death issues and are online getting information and taking that in a way that is allowing them to take in more false information. So that the time to deal with it, and obviously we're in it right now, we can't change what we're in right now, but it can be a word of a cautionary tale for us for our future. When we think about the need to have everyone in the world really have at least a base level of media literacy understanding and MIL understanding, we can see that what is happening with COVID-19 and the spread of the virus is a direct result of people not being clear about the way in which information is shared. That's scary, right? That's really scary.
Thank you, that's really helpful. And in our live panel last week, we discussed the ways that social media can often correct biased news sources, but also that social media can be a major source of misinformation and disinformation in and of itself. How do you see the relationship between these two forms of media, particularly in how they affect politics and good governance? And do you have any tips on how we may best navigate the realms of social media and mainstream media?
Can I clarify? Let me just clarify one thing with you, Emily. When you say two forms of media, those two forms of media, you are social media, and you said traditional media?
Mainstream media,
mainstream.
Yes. Traditional
mainstream
news
okay.
channels, etc.
Okay. I really thought it was an interesting news story recently when the K-pop fans, that their social media campaign really influenced in a positive way, at least to me in a positive way, some pushback, let's say, in stories that people might have up until that point thought, oh, K-pop, that's just Korean pop music. It's nothing serious. But as you point out, social media can be used to influence for good. And so I think this is a really important consideration in terms of media overall, right? Media is not bad. Despite the fact that some people say that media is bad, media is not bad. The people that are using it the way in which we use it affects completely the communication, right? I mean, everybody speaks too. Most people speak. Some people speak with empathy and kindness and generosity, and other people speak mean words. Those same people are going online, and those same people are creating mainstream media as well. So I think it's important to really understand the mediated, right? The mediated nature of this communication. There's a person back there, and they are doing something with technology that's putting the message out. And I think it's important, really at the most basic level, even when I talk to young children about media use and trying to help them be media literate in an age appropriate way, one of the most basic things for people to understand is that all media has an author, right? All media is constructed by someone who made decisions. And when you look at something and you have a feeling about it, it's really important to remember that there was somebody behind it. So in terms of mainstream media, I think it's easy sometimes to forget that because it's big, it feels big and unwieldy and global and corporate. And we're much more likely to be, it's much more likely to be one-way communication, right? Where we turn on a television and it's espousing something to us and we just take it in. We think of social media often as being, we're more conscious, I think, sometimes of who the author is there because we're following a friend, we're following a person that we know, we're following a celebrity or an elected official or an organization. We've made a conscious choice and we want to know what they have to say. So we're thinking a little more about the fact that there are people back there making decisions and we are creators in that as well. So it's easy to remember that not only am I following Emily on Twitter, but I am also creating a Twitter feed myself. So that's one really big difference there. But I think understanding that there are people behind it making decisions is what enables something like the K-pop current event to happen, because people make decisions, people can make good decisions, people can make bad decisions, and all the gray in between. And the idea that a group that is that has initially, let's say, come together for an entertainment purpose primarily, right, to listen to K-pop music, might also realize that in coming together, we actually have other similarities, even though we come from different parts of the world. We have other similarities that have brought us to this K-pop fandom together. And perhaps the strength of our numbers could be used for other things as well. That's such a powerful, I think that's such a powerful and wonderful, really, I mean, most times, aha moment for young people, especially, to realize, because sometimes you, as you're growing up, and I'm going to say growing up like from age 10 to like 30 is a time when you are grappling with how much power you have, and how do I channel that power into things that matter to me. And I think it's easy to feel at various times in that powerless. But there is strength in numbers. And if you can find like-minded people to help forward a cause, you might be able to make real change. And I'm very conscious of the fact that there can be change made on the negative side as well as on the positive side. But I don't want, especially for young people, I don't want them to, you know, throw up your hands and feel like there's nothing that can be done, right? Horrible things are happening in the world and there's nothing that can be done, because that's simply not true. And so I feel like when something happens where young people come together and create something, and whether it's a social media campaign or whatever else, a protest, right, together, or they're gathering on social media for a protest, that's powerful. Because when you experience that and realize that you can influence things, then it leads you to try again. So I think this idea that we might look at social media, look at mainstream media as negative. Oh, we watch too much, we're online too much. It's easy to fall into that trap, but it's individuals, it's us making those decisions, and we could be making good decisions with it too. So I think being conscious, which is what you're trying to do right here, is the start of that. It's, to me, if I could just get, if I could wave some magic wand and have everyone who uses media just think about it a little bit more. Think about the fact that there's an author. Just take 10 seconds and think before you do. I think that could shift a lot. It's not going to shift everything, right? There are people who want to spread bad information, but we could come together, be more supportive, put forth more positive messaging. There's a lot of power in that.
And we've also been debating the problem of regulation, where the issues we may have with government censorship come up against the harms of uncontrolled information and disinformation. How do you think regulation could work effectively, especially when governments may be inclined to control narratives in harmful ways?
Yeah, it's an important and a concerning area to think about government intervention, right? In some cases, we are talking about, when we talk about the media industry or social media, we're talking about companies that are just huge, like unfathomably huge. And they wield quite a bit of influence. So if we want there to be responsible use, how does that happen? I would say to you that, so let's put government intervention in one little pocket over here just for a minute. For there to be more healthy online use, social media or otherwise, requires, it taps into the old African proverb that people talk about frequently, which is, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to do just about anything of importance. So you need the parents to be involved. You need government involved. You need the media industry involved. You need educators involved. You need us, right? So whether it's young people or individuals, you need us involved. You need civic leadership involved, religious leadership involved. Everybody really needs to come together when there is an issue that is so big that really requires substantive change. That's not just going to happen by having one group take responsibility. And in my class, one of the classes that I teach, of course, is in media and children. And one of the questions I ask students on one of the first days is, did you ever have rules about how to consume media in your home? Did your family, your parents have any rules about how to use media? And most students will say no. They had no rules, or they had little rules, like I had to finish my homework first. And then we'll talk about where they consumed media. Were you with your parents when you consumed media? And we'll talk about that for a while. And then I'll say to them later, who should have responsibility for making decisions about what children get to see in media? And they'll say, parents. Parents should be the ones to make that decision. Nobody else should make the decision but parents. Really? But you just told me you didn't listen to your parents. Your parents have no rules, and you weren't with your parents most of the time because you're with your friends and in school. Now what? Well, the truth is parents aren't enough, right? Because you have influences from all these different areas. So to me, there is a role for government. That's one of those areas that needs to come together. The challenge is exactly what you said in your question, which is, not all governments regard guidance of their citizenry the same way. Some have it in a much more conservative way, much more liberal way, much more democratic way, or not. And what do you do then? So I think on the one hand, what this really points to me is primarily the need for individuals to be media literate. There are some places in this world where changing the government intervention of media, while it could happen over time, it certainly is not going to be something that changes quickly. So if you are someone who lives in one area like that, you're living within that reality. What do you do in that reality? So you can keep pushing government, certainly, but you have to take responsibility. That's why it's important for individuals, parents, and educators to be part of that group. As far as the government is concerned, I think about even in the United States, where we're a democratic country, companies can do what they want to do. We're a very capitalist country. Even in the US, there are times where we have recognized that for there to be mindful change that is mindful of the influence on the people using some product or service or social media, then government regulation is going to need to be involved. And sometimes in a democratic country, just the very fact that the government takes up the issue and discusses it, brings, has people come in the US come to talk to the Senate or Congress, just raising the issue can make the social media companies or the media company take more responsibility. So sometimes government moving forward can be enough to get more responsible action from a media company. And I would say to you that we have seen that recently with some of the social media companies, particularly Facebook. I think that in the last few months, Facebook has gone from saying, we're not responsible for what people put on our website, that we just create the platform, they can do what they want, that's not our role, that's not our job. And pushback came from the government a bit, and certainly from people who use Facebook, but there's been more and more talk about the potential for government regulation if things weren't fixed. And suddenly Facebook decided, you know what, maybe we should be doing something about hate speech. So sometimes it's even the role of government to raise the issue up and to show its importance. And not, so making a regulation is an option of something government can do, or making a law, but it's not the only thing government can do. Sometimes just the very power of the government shining its flashlight, its light on something can increase the way people look at it. I think in places where I have seen the government connection to media literacy and sort of the influence of media overall be more successful is where people in the field, be that students, educators, media industry folks, civic leadership, they've cultivated specific people in government who they have tried to help understand what the needs are and what the concerns are, so that you are cultivating a relationship within government with elected officials to help them understand what the concerns are and what they aren't, right? Because we want, in almost all cases, we would want a government to take the least action possible to make the best change, right? So how do we help government officials to be educated about the issues and help them be involved without doing more than we really need or want them to do? But it is a really delicate balance. And as we are having a conversation here that's global, it's really hard to have a global conversation about, because obviously it's so different from country to country, sometimes even more regional than that. So I think taking personal responsibility and having it be part of school education is key, because then we're helping to raise media literate people, media literate citizens. And a media literate citizen is going to have a better conversation with government about this.
Thank you so much, Sherri. I feel like you already answered the next question I was going to ask, but I'm still going to ask something from what you've said. Because my next question actually was going to be, what do young people do when they are faced with these multiple sources of official information? So the World Health Organization, for example, is saying this, and independent governments are saying that. But I think from what you've said, you said something about the need for individuals to be media literate. And my question now is, I mean, before literacy happens, there's that stage of ignorance or not knowing. And as you're speaking, I was thinking a lot about media literacy. It's not a term that I've been very much familiar with. I think for a lot of places, for some parts of the world, it's kind of new. So why should I be so conscious about the information I'm getting? I'm not a journalist. What's my business? Mine is to take in. So if you're going, if you say you're a news channel or you're a media space, I trust that you're giving me the right information. So as a young person, I just want to listen and take it in and act according to that, because, well, that's why you are official. But now you're pushing the responsibility to me. I have to be media literate, but I don't even know that I have to be media literate. So what happens what in that situation for a young person who is ignorant of these things? What do they do? Or whose responsibility is it then? Like, how do we start going back and letting people know, okay, not everything you see you have to take, and you have to become conscious? Like, I don't know, what do we do? Because all of this is new to me, and I feel like I want to take it all and share with some of my people in Nigeria, because it's not something we're very conscious about, but then it makes a lot of sense. But at what point did you begin to make these changes?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So I think it would be helpful to think about the definition of media literacy. I'm going to shift the earlier definition I said, and I'm going to give you a more informal definition of it. And this is how I often explain it to people that are, let's say, my age or older. I will often say, when I was in primary school, when I was in elementary school, my teachers could not imagine, and you are, right, a literacy teacher, Miss Jennifer, right? So when I was in elementary school, my teachers could not imagine letting me graduate from, say, year 5, year 6, without knowing how to read and write. That's what it meant to be literate when I was in school in the 1960s. And that was something that was taught in school and that I knew I needed to learn. Why? Because I wanted to be able to understand the world around me. I needed to be able to read communication and converse with my friends and my family, and entertainment, right? Be able to read books and things like that. Well, when I think about being literate today, take media out of it for a minute. When I think about being literate today, how does that compare? Well, reading and writing. Reading is really consuming media. Writing is really authoring media. When I think about media literacy today, or literacy today, I think about the need for people to be able to consume and create media in all the ways that we can consume and create media today. When I was 8 years old, it was enough for me to know how to use a pencil and a book. That's not enough today. A young person today, or actually any age person today, to communicate needs to understand what the computer is doing, how to use their computer. They really should understand how Facebook or some form of social media works. They should understand how to make a PowerPoint and how to upload pictures to, or a video to YouTube. Those are core elements to be able to vote, to get a job, to communicate with friends and family. All of that involves being online, involves digital communication. We cannot possibly consider someone literate today if they're not media literate. We are doing people a disservice if we let young people graduate from whatever grade you want to put that pin on without them having the skills to assess that. And I think about when I was in primary school, and we would read a book and we would write a book report, right? We would have a conversation about that book in my class. Who was the author? Why did the author make those choices? What were the characters in the book? Why did you like it? Did the author have a point of view? Were they trying to convince us to do something? Those are core media literacy questions. Ask them about everything. Ask them about the news you consume. Ask them about your friend's Facebook post or Instagram or Snapchat post. That's what it means. So it's funny when you think about being literate, you know, think about media literacy is an expanded definition of literacy. It is what it means to be literate today. And that's really at the core of it, right? So you were talking, the other thing that you mentioned though, so literacy was one thing you stated. The other was about, you didn't actually use this word, I think, but I wrote down trusted sources. So what you were asking me is sort of what, am I pushing the responsibility back to the person? So first I would say to you, I'm not pushing back to the person. I'm really reminding you that the responsibility always was with the person. So that doesn't mean others don't have responsibility, but individuals always did. When you went to school, you learned how to read and write. Nobody read and write for you, read and wrote for you. You knew that you needed to learn how to read and write, that maybe your mom or some other elder could read to you, but that wasn't good enough. You were going to learn to read so that you could read what you wanted to read. And so that is core. It's always been core, and it's just as core today. The problem is that today people are abdicating that, right? They're saying that I don't need to worry about it. And I feel like that's really true when we think about people that are older, you know, over 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, who I also want to be online so that they can communicate and vote and get news and information. The piece about trusted sources, though, I think is an important one to talk about, because my perspective on this is sometimes different than other people. What I hear often from educators or other folks who are talking about how to not share misinformation, a little double negative there, but what people will often say is you need to check multiple sources, right? That's the go-to instruction. You can't just read one thing, you have to read multiple things. And I worry about that as a direction because, you know, when we first began talking today, somebody mentioned that I have a busy schedule. Sure, but so do you. Everyone I know has a busy schedule. People are juggling home and work and school and family and loved ones. You know, you're juggling lots of things in life. And the idea that someone is going to go online, look at a news story that they think is interesting, read it, then decide they need to find multiple other sources about the same topic to check the validity of that. And I don't even know that you're so media literate that you're going to be able to even tell the validity of each of those sources. I don't think that's, it's a great instruction, but I want you to be doing, I want to give you some instruction that I think is going to be more realistic. And to me, that involves exploring the sources you use, not the stories themselves. So if you find that you are constantly getting your news, so you go through your social media feed, you're reading different things, oh, that looks interesting, and you go to click on that. What is the source? What are maybe the top 5, 6 sources that you find yourself clicking on frequently? Take 1 hour, one time, or you know, maybe periodically you're going to do this, but to take a chunk of time and go into the website for each of those sources. So let's say CNN is a source of yours and you like to go online and look at CNN. Let's say the BBC is a source. So I would go on that website and try to look for more information about how they make decisions about what gets on that news source. If it is a reputable news source, they will be transparent about that. So you could read the, you know, About Us section. You could look for an editorial board. Do they have an editorial board? What do they do about errors? Do they print retractions? What do they do when they discover that information is not right? Do they share it? Are they willing to say, we were wrong? We printed a story last week. We uploaded a story last week. We now have more information. We thought Sherri said this. She actually didn't. She said this instead. Or used this photograph. That wasn't true. If you can get to the policy level, and again, a reputable news source will be transparent about that because they want you to know that they're a reputable news source. So if you go on a website and you start trying to search, do they have an editorial team? What do they do for retractions? How do they decide? Do they have is there a senior editor who checks junior reporters' writing before it goes online? If you can't find that, that is a big red flag that it is not a reputable news source. And then you shouldn't use it. I mean, bottom line, I don't care how wonderful the article looks. Don't use the source. Certainly don't spread the source. So do a little due diligence on that. Then it's still always best to read the article, absolutely. But you will have a better handle on whether the source that you're getting that story from can be trusted. You know, there've been various news articles that have come out saying that when you ask young people, you know, people between 15 and 25, where do they get their news? The answer they often give is social media. But that's not true. Social media is just a platform. You are getting it from people or organizations you are following on social media. Well, who are you following? What are you following? And if you're following, let's say me, and I'm posting the article from CNN or I'm posting the article from BBC, you still want to know what the source is. Checking into me is not helping. I'm not the news. You need to see the thing that I'm following. Where is the place that is actually writing the article? That's where you need to go. I think if we could get people to do a search of their most favored, what they think are their most favorite sources every 6 months or so, we would go a long way toward people having a better understanding about what sources they can trust and which ones they can't. Now, you know, let's say you discover that some fun gossip celebrity site is a place where you're getting news all the time, and it's not really to be a trust. You look into it and actually, gosh, no editorial board. And the people on the editorial board, sometimes they'll say, we have an editorial board, but they don't tell you who's on the editorial board. Well, that would be a red flag, because if I had a news site with a good, reputable editorial board, I would tell you who those people were. If I'm not telling you, that's a sign. So let's say we do that, and I go through that and I realize this is not a reputable site, but gosh, they write such fun articles. Okay, so maybe you're going to read those things every once in a while, but don't share them. Don't share them then. So we have to take responsibility for that. If we're going to enjoy the benefits of being creators, of being able to have our own websites and our own YouTube channels and our own Snapchats, then we have to take responsibility for what goes out and hold back when we know it's not truthful. Because we know that once it gets out, it doesn't matter whether you could write on the top, I know this story is not true, friends, but it's so funny, I'm sharing it anyway. That won't matter. Everybody will remember the article, not that you said don't believe it. So you have to take responsibility.
So it's like the starting point would be going back to schools and teachers teaching with a lot more consciousness. Like you said, literacy is no longer what it used to be. So it goes beyond just being able to read and write ABC or speak. It's about internalizing and questioning the things that you get in, just the way you question the text you read. So maybe you can share a few more tips on how teachers can really teach media literacy and the ability to differentiate between different sources of information.
Providing suggestions about the best way to teach media literacy depends a whole lot on who we're teaching. So that's core. If you are sitting in front of a group of preschoolers, which I've taught media literacy to, you're going to have one kind of conversation. If you're talking to undergraduate college students, another group, parents, elders, there are different groups and different ages. So I'm just going to say sort of generally, let's assume that our group that we're talking to are adults in some way. And I'm going to include adults like mid-teenagers, late teenagers, and up. So these are people who are already probably deeply consuming and creating media. So one of the things you can do is first ask people, what is the media they're consuming? So you can do that in a little survey. It could be a little fun survey you do together. It could be on paper, or you could create something, a Google survey, just to get a sense of the room, right? What are the things that people like to, where are they going for news? What are their favorite TV shows? Who are the music artists that they like to listen to most of all? Is there a book you read for pleasure recently? So just try to get some information about that. From that information, that can give you a really strong window into where to start. because the starting point, you know, we say meet people where they are. I don't want to walk into a room and say to everyone, okay, you all need to learn more about how to consume news. Like that, some people will love that, and some people are going to be like, oh, I really don't care. It's much better, I think, to find out what kind of media people are consuming. What do they love to consume? And then have conversations about media literacy using that. So let's say, I mean, I've had conversations with students where, you know, when, gosh, do you all know the HBO show Game of Thrones? Does everybody know about Game of Thrones? It was a very, very popular show on HBO that, P.S., I watched one episode and had to stop because there's so much blood, I could not do it, but I know everybody was watching it. So when I want to have conversations with my students about something that requires critical thinking, I often will begin with Game of Thrones, because for them to, if I say, think about like who created Game of Thrones and why do you think he created it? Why do we think HBO thought it was going to be a good show for HBO? How many seasons were there? Why do you think that show got X number of seasons, but this show did not? So we have this whole conversation about why do you think the storyline went this way and not that way? And then I can say, so let's actually think about what are the kinds of questions what were we just asking questions about? And eventually in a conversation, people will get to, oh, well, you were asking us questions about who the author was, what their purpose was, what was the message, how were we swayed or manipulated, how did money enter into the decisions? Like, you'll end up with big bucket areas. Okay, well, actually, Game of Thrones is really at its core media. Can we apply these same ideas to other forms of media? What other forms of media do you use? Oh, in our survey, it looks like you're all using Snapchat. Let's think about Snapchat. And then have a conversation about Snapchat. So you can lead through, because the truth is we want them to apply those critical thinking skills to Game of Thrones as much as we want them to apply, I do at least, I want them to apply to Game of Thrones and to the news they consume. So if the way in, you know, we can do that with who's got the top song on the charts this week, or what is the song that has been most downloaded? Okay, what are the lyrics of that song? We talk about what are the lyrics, who was the producer? You know, there are millions of people out there making music who are not racking up the same downloads as this person. Why? And start to talk about how corporate structures influence who gets pushed forward and the messages that get pushed forward. Why, you know, female artists feel they need to dress a certain way. How is that also, do we see that in music? Where else do we see that? So that can help you lead into gender conversations, and that is about media and media influence of gender and gender representation. You can do the same thing with race and ethnicity. So I think that's why I always try to start is with something that's interesting, some content that's interesting to the group, and then help them pull back and see that these are really core topics about media literacy. Then that's a good moment then to say, you know, there's actually something called media literacy, and this is what the definition of it is, and look what we were just doing. That's what we were just doing, right? And to really, you know, it becomes ultimately something that is very fluid. It's as an individual. So sometimes when I'm first explaining media literacy to people, they'll feel like the reaction you can get is, oh, you know, you're ruining television for me. You're ruining media for me. Now I can't look at any of it without thinking. And my first reaction to that is like, well, that's a good thing. You should be thinking about it. But, you know, I work at this all the time, and I've been known to binge watch a bunch of shows on a Saturday afternoon, and I watch bad TV sometimes, and I've gotten sucked into news and information that I shouldn't have. You know, it is a daily muscle that I have to work, and it gets more and more difficult when things like deep fakes and, you know, augmented reality and things that get where the technology, the ability to fake the technology is getting better and better. And so it's not that I'm never going to get tricked or never consume bad media or share an inappropriate story. I'm sure I have done that occasionally, but I am more mindful every minute, all the time, of what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And I still have fun with it. You know, I'm getting together with my aunt on Friday night to like sit together and watch, they're going to do a live stream of Hamilton on Disney Plus. We're going to sit together and watch that. But I'm also conscious of like, why is Disney Plus putting Hamilton on Disney Plus? Well, Disney Plus is a brand new streaming service. It's only a few months old. They need as many subscribers as possible. And if they put Hamilton on, a bunch of people like me and my aunt who have not yet subscribed to Disney Plus will subscribe to Disney Plus. So it's about money. So, I mean, there's conversation to have wherever people are and what they're consuming. And then it makes it, the value of that to me ultimately is, yes, you're going to cultivate the skill, but also that you will recognize that this is just a part of life, right? We consume media every minute of every day, just about, and we need to be more mindful about it. It's as simple as that.
That was super helpful. I feel like I just attended a teacher training session.
Yay!
Yeah, thank you so much. Definitely going to be sharing this with some teachers I know, and of course, my students eventually. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Esperanza will be taking over now.
This week, we're going to our last week of the Lockdown Live series, and we're going to be talking about post-COVID-19 futures. If I may ask, what is your hope towards a post-COVID future?
Oh boy, gosh. A post-COVID future is, right? That's just like, we long for that. Yeah, like I said, I'm in the US and I'm watching us not be too many people, not social distancing, not wearing masks. It's scary and frightening. But the global world, right, worldwide, we have been through bad things before and have recovered. Unfortunately, right, there are way too many people that are dying through this, but as a global universe, right, we will recover from that. What I'm looking forward to and what I think about when I think about post-COVID is about education, changes to education, and changes to what it means to be together, right? What does that mean now? It's fascinating to think that we have turned, you know, after years of trying to convince many teachers about online education, we basically like flipped a switch and said, starting whatever date, you're going to have to start doing it and then just figure it out. And obviously that's not the best way to do it, but it happened. So now you have many, you know, millions of teachers who know how to do it. They may not like it online. I mean, I know I've been teaching online various courses for years, and there's just nothing like being face-to-face with a room of students. That's by far the best. But I did recognize like years ago, that this is going to be something that's going to happen because of the money aspect of it, right? Because it allows universities to increase the number of students that they're teaching without increasing classroom space, which is where a lot of the expense is. Lights, the desks, right? All of those things that go into the space. So when I think about post-COVID, I wonder about whether we will be able to, what will we need to do to convince people to come back to campus? How will we balance the affordability and inexpense of doing things online, or less expense of doing things online, with the irreplaceable experience of being face-to-face? That's how I feel about that. And then I wonder about the entire notion of togetherness. There is research that's been done on presence, what's called presence. Not presence like you give a present, but to be present, right? So presence. And what does it mean to feel like we are actually together when we're not together? And we've all gotten better at that, right? We've spent many more hours on Zoom or Skype or whatever your preferred version is. And we've gotten more comfortable at looking at a camera or making sure the lighting is right and making sure my hair is the way I want it to be. And, you know, all the things that we think about when we're online. And that's true for families. It's true for businesses, true for educators. So I suspect that a bunch of those things are going to stay. And some of them are wonderful. Like I think about why have I not been Zooming my sister at least every week I only get to see her face to face maybe once a month, but we talk on the phone, but why have I not been looking at her face to face? So some of those things will be wonderful, and friends that are far that you get to, that you'll maybe spend more time with, but, and ways of learning online. But I hope we will be, we'll begin, you know, we'll follow that arc and at some point understand which things are really better to do face to face and which things are either better online or adequate online. So I look forward to that. I look forward to us being at a point where we can be face to face and hug. Really, that's what I want, hugs.
Oh, that was such a powerful session. Thank you very much for the uplifting message. And thank you so much for your time, Professor Sherri Culver. We appreciate. One of the key takeaways is the fact that it takes a village to raise a child. That's a key thing you reminded us today, and it stands out to mean that everyone has a role to play regarding misinformation and disinformation. We hope that everyone who's listening in from home remembers that it's a crucial matter. It's a matter of life and death, especially being in times of COVID-19, and hence keenness and fact-checking is very crucial to avoid matters misinformation and disinformation. Thank you so much for listening in. We look forward to having you on board on Friday, June 3rd, as we conclude our Lockdown Live series with an episode of Post-COVID-19 Futures. Thank you so much.